And welcome back to Dear Jane. I am Scott Baker, and she is Marcy Little. Marcy, how are you?
Great.
We're excited to talk today we're going to talk about how abortion can impact men. We don't talk about that a whole lot, or maybe it's starting to get a little bit more attention, but maybe just we're starting to catch up with that. But before we do that, let's talk about our sponsor very quickly, Marcy, Cogency Strategic.
Cogency Strategic exists for all of you pro-life organizations out there that are facing any kind of pro-life political battles. They can help. They can make sure that your messaging is on point, that it goes at a micro-targeted level to the right audience, that when you need to get out the vote, when you need to impact policies in your state, that you're able to do that. Cogency Strategic can help you place the messages where you need them most, when it matters most. Their team of over 70 pro-life strategists, that's all they do. They work on pro-life campaigns. So give them a call, check them out. They'll help you win your campaigns for life.
All right, cogencystrategic.com. So the impact of abortion on men. It seems like maybe that's starting to get a little bit more of attention, like in pregnancy centers and things like that. They're starting to offer resources, starting to realize the need there. We're really pleased to be joined today by Greg Mayo. He is, he's an author. I've been reading his book, Almost Daddy, but it's a pretty cool novel. And he's also involved with support for abortion for men, the healing strategist. I'm just checking out his website here just a little bit ago, supportafterabortion.com. Lots of great resources there. Greg, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us why, what are some of the common problems that men run into when they are post-abortive, and what is your experience with those?
So, great question. One of the biggest things we see in men is disenfranchised grief. Now, to unpack that a little bit, men have these feelings after an abortion loss. Some of them, it hits them immediately. Some of them, it takes a bit of time. But they have these feelings, anger, shame, depression, guilt, sadness, all these things. The disenfranchised grief is in the part where, well, Scott, let me say it this way. This is a story, or the way I set it up to explain it to people. Imagine a couple and they intentionally get pregnant, and then there's a miscarriage. Now, you would logically console the man and the woman in that situation, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Unfortunately, in an abortion situation, the man is often told, your feelings don't matter. It's not your body. It's not your choice. We can go down the list. I wrote a white paper for Support After Abortion on the impact of abortion on men. It was based on a study Support After Abortion commissioned through Shepard Research. And the findings were posted a little over a year ago. We did op-eds in Newsweek and the Washington Stand and Fox News. And here's what I found, Scott. In the comments section, I had to quit reading them. Because in the comments section, there were things like, you're a man, shut up, your feelings don't matter. I hope this man, me, the author, has a daughter. And if he does, I hope she's raped. Then we'll see what he thinks about abortion. And I could go on and on and on. Thousands of comments. Now, for me personally, I've been in healing for 15 years. They didn't have the impact they did on me as they would, say, a guy who still hasn't told anybody, who's still walking with that pain. If he reads those comments, what does he think? Well, my feelings don't matter. I guess I won't talk about it.
Yeah, that kind of happened with the character in your book. He's, confronted by people who don't know that he's had an abortion, and kind of leaves a sour taste in his mouth with the people, with that interaction. I was struck as I was reading your book. It's very well written. Just how many lies are told about men, and I think to men who are kind of facing these unplanned pregnancy situations with their partners. And you said a lie, even a well-intentioned lie, causes more pain. I think sometimes we think that like little lies are going to help move them forward, or it's going to be okay. But really the lie that the life inside the womb is just a clump of cells really doesn't help, and it can cause relational damage. I was struck by, I think one of the things that abortion seems to promise is that relationships can continue like nothing happened after an abortion, and that wasn't the case for the main character in this book. Can you speak to that and maybe some of the other lies that men are told?
Yeah, so from my experience over the last 15 years, it's not the case for most relationships. They don't continue because now there's this thing, and there's this thing we're not dealing with, and at all usually, and certainly not in a healthy way. So, for Ben, for as an 18-year-old kid, from the very beginning, he's being told lies. It's not a baby, dude. Don't worry about it. You're gonna be fine. We'll just move past it. At one point, his girlfriend says, "We're not. Remember, we agreed not to talk about this anymore because it'll be fine." Now we know with any kind of grief or trauma, and this is like Psych 101, right? If you don't talk about it, it manifests in other ways. I had a therapist once call it emotional whack-a-mole. If you don't deal with it and you just try to knock it back down, it's going to pop out somewhere else. And we see that in Ben's life, and we see that in the lives of thousands of men that I've talked to. So that's one of the lies. The other lie is you'll get over it. It wasn't real, right? Your relationship's going to be fine, and it wasn't for Ben. The other lie Ben was told started with on the steps of the abortion clinic, right? Men are told it's not your decision. You can voice your opinion, some people say, but ultimately you are to support her. Ben's an 18-year-old kid, so he protested the abortion, was told it's going to happen anyway, so he did what he thought he was supposed to do. He went to the clinic. Now, Ben was in there about 8 seconds, and they asked him to wait outside. And on the steps, he saw poster boards. There had been a protest, the day before, earlier that day, and they said, "Baby killer, burn in hell, God hates you." That's also a lie. The guy, a year later that Ben bumps into at the gas station that's on his way to a protest. That guy, however well-intentioned, he was trying to save babies' lives, right? So I applaud that man's intent, but his method was way off. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. When my book came out, I talked to a friend of mine who's a pastor. He read it, and we were in his office talking about the book on a Monday morning, drinking Sunday's leftover coffee because that's kind of our thing. But anyway, and he said, a friend of mine protests abortion clinics. Do you think that's good or bad? And I said, protest, or he's a sidewalk advocate, right? Is he out there praying for people, offering to pray with people? He said, no, he protests. What do you think, good or bad? And I said, well, I'm not going to judge good or bad. I'm going to ask you, is it effective? Is he changing hearts and turning people toward Christ by telling them they're going to burn in hell and God hates them? Mm. I think probably not. So those are the lies. And with Ben, you see in the story, as he rolls into his 20s, he's kind of stuck in the middle because he's told God doesn't want you anymore. What you've done so bad, God will never want you. And he's told by the other people this horrendous lie. It wasn't really a baby. What are you upset about? That is a really confusing place to be for anybody, especially a young man.
One of the things that interests me as we follow Ben's story, and it's just as I think about men in general, again, told all the time, you really don't have a voice in this. You shouldn't have an opinion in this. Your opinion should be whatever hers is. But then it happens, and then you begin to struggle. Men, a couple things, if we apply some stereotypes to us men. One, we typically don't talk about it with anybody. And then two, we deny it or that sort of thing. One of the things that's interesting about Ben is he sort of leaves a path of destruction. He certainly has the ability to hurt others. The hurt that he has is transformed out sometimes to hurt others. So all of that leads to the question: as post-abortive men, what are some common signs that they're struggling? Even if they think they're not, what might be some signs that, maybe this is something you should address?
So one of the first things is what's changed in your behavior and your actions. And I'll tell you, I spoke at group at a church in southern Indiana a few years ago, about 9 years ago. Long story short, after I spoke, a guy was waiting up by my truck. My first thought was, uh-oh, this isn't going to go well. But the guy said, I've been sober 17 years, or 22 years, 22 years. And I said, congratulations, brother. I'm happy for you. He said, well, that ain't all I got to tell you. He said, I didn't think about, until I heard your story, that I didn't touch a drop of alcohol or a drug until 3 days after my girlfriend had an abortion in college.
Huh.
That's one of the biggest things we see, substance abuse. Depression is another thing. Anger. Engaging in risk-taking behaviors. The summer after my girlfriend had an abortion, which was the summer after my senior year, I remember, although I didn't have a name for it, I was severely depressed. I couldn't hold a thought, let alone I couldn't hold a job. I ended up flunking out of college. And I engaged in all kinds of risky behaviors. Now, my dad at that time was a recovering alcoholic. My stepdad was a practicing alcoholic. So I didn't go that route. But all of a sudden, I got a motorcycle. How fast can I go, right? Cliff diving, bungee jumping, kayaking for the first time down Class 4 rapids when I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't care. It wasn't that I was trying to die. I realize now through years of recovery and therapy that I was trying to feel something because so much of my mental and emotional energy was spent trying not to feel anything about the abortion. So you go to the other extreme trying to feel some spark of anything, right? But that's the main thing, Scott. You look for behavioral changes. What changed? What was the hinge point? Because once you get a guy to identify what's changed in his life, what's changed in his behaviors, you can get him to walk backwards and get to in a place where he's in touch with whatever emotions he felt when the abortion happened. And by the way, this is true whether the guy fought against the abortion, whether he knew about it, whether he pushed for it, it doesn't matter. Eventually those emotions catch up and they have an impact.
Do you think it's harder for men than women to connect how they're feeling or how they're behaving to the abortion itself, since it isn't, especially if it wasn't a decision they made, obviously it's not a surgical or other kind of procedure that they had to go through. Do you think it's harder for them to connect those dots?
I do, Marcy. And I think it's hard for the reasons you said, but also because, again, men are told you don't get to have a feeling about it. And now let's couple that, and I don't want to get off on too big of a tangent here, but let's couple that with the fact that we are in a fatherhood crisis in this country. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of young men. I'm Generation X, and the two generations behind me are, percentage-wise, largely raised without a father in the home. They go to a school where something like 73% of the teachers are women, so their largest influences are women. Now, that being said, that's okay. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with women. What I am saying is that they don't have men intentionally teaching them how to be men, how to feel like a man, how to express your feelings like a man, how to interact like a man. And so we have to have an understanding of all that as we walk into the why aren't they connecting the dots with their abortion. I didn't forever. I was aware of it. When I met my wife when I was 28, that's one of the first things I told her about, because I didn't want that hanging out there, right? Someday it'll come up. However, so that was at 28. I didn't enter healing until 39. And I'm a guy who had been around recovery stuff my whole life.
Why did it take you so long?
Because everybody told me it wasn't anything I was supposed to feel about. And after a while, you get to a place where you're like, well, whatever I'm dealing with is not that. I went to see a therapist when I was 24. And about the 7th or 8th session, I mentioned the 2 abortion experiences I was a part of. And he kind of sat back in his chair and he looked at me and just like this and went, that's not really a thing. Tell me more about your dad.
Wow.
And I thought, okay. The way it happened, and this is why God's so cool, one of the reasons, I was doing a book study in my church on a book with a group of men. I was leading the study. I had nothing nothing to do with abortion. I don't think the word was mentioned in all 300 pages. And yet one night, sitting around that room at church on a Thursday night, the Holy Spirit said, "Hey, Greg, share about your abortion." And I was like, no, we're not doing that. There's no way. But he kept bugging me. And I did. And I was scared to death. There's 13 men sitting here that I go to church with. They know my family. I've never talked about it. They don't talk about it. And I'm bargaining with the Holy Spirit, right? I'm like, dude, I'm telling you, nobody else is talking about this. I'm not doing it. But I finally did. And I got choked up. And I'm like, where is this coming from, right? 3 other guys, by the time I locked up the doors, shared their abortion story. And y'all, that was the moment when I thought, oh, that's the missing piece to this puzzle. That's why I can't quite connect stuff. By this time, I was raising 3 children with my wife. And as I got into healing, which there wasn't a lot for men back then at all, I started going through books I could find with my pastor, and I met with a therapist once a week, this time a Christian therapist. A little bit of a difference for me. And I started working through these things, and I not only realized how it had impacted my life from 18 to 39, but here's the kicker, y'all. I realized how it had impacted my parenting because of that unhealed trauma. And we're learning more and more about this. I started a group, monthly webinar, Support After Abortion, in February that we do every month. It's live on Wednesdays, and it's called Men's Healing Matters. And we talk about men's healing. We talk about helping train up volunteers and male volunteers and staff members at PRCs. And because we saw a need, just in the past 2 or 3 years, we've seen a huge need. When I got through, when I say through healing, you don't ever quit healing, right? It's just like you don't ever quit growing spiritually. But I got to a point 4 or 5 years into my journey, and I called a few PRCs around where I live in Indianapolis and looking to volunteer. And these very kind, well-intentioned women said, "I'm sorry, we just don't have stuff for guys." So to go from that to 10 years later, where now I host a monthly webinar with Support After Abortion. Indeed, they hired me, Support After Abortion did, because we saw a need that now more and more men are talking. More and more men are looking for answers. Like, hey, I feel something. What do I do about this? Every time I hear that Tim McGraw song, Red Ragtop, I start tearing up. Why? When I hear Brick, the Ben's Fold song, it does something to me. Are you guys familiar with the Kendrick brothers?
Heard of them. Yeah.
They had a movie. They do a lot of Christian films, and they had one come out a couple of years ago that was about a woman who was on the abortion table, got up and ran out of there, gave her child up for adoption, and the movie's about reconnecting with that child. One of the guys that produced the film called me a few months after it came out and said, we're in a group called the National Coalition of Ministries to Men Together. And he said, "Hey, I need to talk to you. Because after this movie came out, yeah, we had a bunch of people calling about adoption and stuff, but what we didn't count on is all these men reaching out to us and saying, hey, my girlfriend chose abortion 10 years ago, 20 years ago, whatever. I don't know what to do. But that movie made me feel a certain kind of way. What do I do?" So I know that was a really long answer. I apologize. But
No, what's interesting, one of the common sort of a thread that I see you talking about here is talking about it for the first time, or at least maybe not the first time, but taking that big first step. I'm interested, you talked about how you told your wife. Take us into that timeline a little bit. I'm assuming it was a different woman, right?
yeah.
Okay, so you make the decision to tell your wife. How hard was that? How did you do that? Walk us through that a little bit if you're willing.
So we had been dating, I don't know, maybe a month. We'd gone out 4 or 5 times. She had an 8-month-old son, 9-month-old at that point, and who I ended up raising as my own. He's my son, just like my other 2.
Mm-hmm.
But we were talking one night about being a single mom. Because my dad left when I was 6, I was raised by a single mom. I have a soft spot in my heart for mothers. And we were talking about it, and I said, I should be a dad already. just like that. And she said, how do you mean? And I told her what happened. Um, and her response was, I'm so sorry that happened to you. She didn't judge. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You
We,
didn't wrestle with it or anything. It sounds like you just decided, hey, here you go. I mean, you decided, I guess, early on, you're just going to be honest all the way through.
yeah. So, and that's the funny thing, right? When you start dating somebody, and by the time I met my wife, like I said, I was 28, you're always trying to impress them. And usually the first 3 or 4 months, it's your best face, right? The moment I met her, and I got to tell you guys this, she'll probably kill me for saying this on air, but we're still married 25 years later, but it was a setup. Her best friend office was next door to mine, and I told her friend, I'm like, I don't want to meet anybody. This is ridiculous. I don't have time for this. We met, and we were gonna a bunch of us, big group of us, ride down to a comedy show, and so um, my wife and I already, when I met her, I already was like, she's out of my league. Like this ain't gonna happen, right? Um, but I said, well, the three of us can just take my truck. And she looked over at my truck. Her dad, a lifelong Chevy employee, right? And she said, a Ford?
Uh-oh.
Why would somebody buy a Ford? You're driving a Ford? And I looked right at her and I said, I didn't mean to buy a Ford, but somebody bought the last piece of junk sky blue Cavalier on the lot, so I'm stuck with this. And the look on her face, and she, as she tells the story, at that moment she was like, "Oh, this guy's different. He's just going to say it like it is." And the whole time we were dating, I just did. I was just honest with her. We were at a mall, and was trying on clothes, and she said, "How does this look?" And I said, "Horrible. Don't wear that. Get something different." But that level of honesty. So the thing is, Scott, I didn't wrestle with the decision. The moment was there. It felt right. I felt like we had a connection that could be a long-term thing. So far, so good.
Yeah.
And it just came out. I'm like, well, this is the right time. I'm going to tell her.
Well, it seems like, so you did the right, well, in retrospect, obviously, you right out of the gate, you do the right thing. Makes me wonder about, I'm certain there are many men out there who have been in a new relationship for a while, right? And they've just never told anybody, just like you talked about before. Boy, that's now to say, okay, now I've been in a relationship now with this woman for X number of months or years or whatever, but I really need to tell her. What advice do you have for that guy?
Well, so interesting you asked me that because, I speak all over the country at all kinds of different men's events. And one guy, and everywhere I go, and in the past decade, the thousands of places I've spoken, everywhere I go, at least one guy comes up and says, "Hey, look, I've never told anybody this before, but this one guy that sticks out to me, it wasn't a huge crowd. It was about 1,200 people. And afterwards, a guy walks over to me and he says, "Hey, I really appreciate you sharing that and the work you're doing in your books." And I said, "Hey, thank you for saying so." He said, "Look, I have a story like that. My story's 42 years ago." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry for your loss, brother." He said, I haven't told my wife or my 3 daughters." And I said, "How do you feel about keeping that secret?" Because see, Scott, he came to me for a reason. He came and shared that because he wanted to know what he should do without asking. Guy's not going to walk up and say, "What should I do?" They're going to lay out the problem and assume every man's going to try to fix it, right? That guy thing. Anyway, he said, "Well, I feel like I need to tell him, but I don't know how." I said, "Are you a man of faith?" It was at a Christian men's conference. He said, "I am." I said, "Is your wife?" He said, "She is." I said, "Well, first pray about it, and then pray with her, and then share with her open and honestly." That's all you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I prayed together and about it, but that's all you can do. If you wait, it's going to be harder, but you have to be honest. Imagine if, and I tell guys this that haven't told their wife. Now that guy was extreme, 40 some years, but I tell guys this if they're dating somebody and it's been a year and they haven't told them. And I said, what if this young lady you're with, girlfriend, wife, whatever she is, what if out of nowhere, 5, 10, 20 years from now, she said, "Hey, By the way, I had a kid and gave it up for adoption. I didn't really want to say anything, but my daughter's 17 now, and she's actually going to come over and meet us. Would you want it to come like that? Or would you want it to come in a moment of prayerful peace, reconciliation, a moment where you're being honest and sharing so that you don't have any secrets with your spouse? There's a big difference between those two, right? And I think that, like when I train guys at PRCs, a lot of guys look for a formula, and there's not one. Be honest. That's the formula. Tell the truth from the spirit of love and peace and doing the right thing, and you'll find eventually it'll work out. Will she be hurt initially? Yeah, she might be. She might have a feeling about that. Now, I tell guys this too. You don't get to have a feeling about her feeling about it. That's not how this works, right? In recovery, and after I wrote the novel, I wrote a men's recovery guide, 15-week study based on the 12 steps. And one of the steps is you make amends to people. So if you're married and you've never told your wife, that'd be one of those people. I don't know. I've been through recovery stuff my whole life, my whole adult life. I've read the Bible several times. I've been to psychologists, been to group meetings of different kinds. I say all that to say, I don't know any other way around the truth.
Yeah, I was thinking about for the guys, or even just in my own life, for different things that I've needed healing from. It's a painful process, and sometimes it feels like getting started is that really hard step that you have to take. And then as you take that step, it feels like it gets a little easier, a little easier. What is kind of that healing and recovery process like? How do you walk guys through that? What could guys expect if if there's some guys listening to this that think, I need that. What's that journey like?
So the first thing, Marcy, just what you said, you got to admit there's a problem. You got to take the first step. The hardest thing for guys to understand is that when I take this first step, I don't get to know what the second step is just yet. That's a life lesson, not even a recovery lesson. But at Support After Abortion, we have a product called Keys to Open Healing. It's a 6-week study. And it's what I would call Abortion Recovery 101. It walks you through the process of forgiveness, forgiving yourself, forgiving the mother of the child, and healing and finding a bit of peace. I just had a book come out a couple weeks ago that I wrote for Support After Abortion called Unraveled Roots for Men. And there we go into childhood issues. If you grew up in a home with abandonment, abuse, codependency, addiction, that's also a 6-week study. And what we're finding is some men get in touch with their abortion thing and they want to heal from that. And so we go through Keys to Open Healing. But in the process of that, they get in touch with other stuff. See, for me to be in a position at 18 where I was in a position to cause an unplanned pregnancy, I had to have other problems before that, right? Church abuse and all these different things. And so we find that when guys get a little peace about the abortion, that they get in touch with other stuff. We also find with Unraveled Roots for Men that when guys get in touch with some of these childhood issues and how they impacted their adult decisions, then they want to enter into abortion healing. So the first step's the first step, right? That's an old recovery phrase. I wrote my novel after talking to hundreds of groups because I knew when I shared a story, guys would come forward. I wrote the novel so that guys would read the story and come forward. The stuff I'm writing with Support After Abortion now is about, okay, now you've come forward, let me help you find some healing. And everybody's journey is going to look a little bit different. I just finished up facilitating a virtual group a couple weeks ago, and I told one of the guys, and we all laughed, but I was serious. When I got through abortion healing, I got in touch with the fact that I had high functioning anxiety. And I told my therapist when I got in touch with it, I said, man, this is really wild to me because I thought everybody just walked around like this all the time. You know what I mean? Um, but yeah, the first step's the first step. They can reach out to Support After Abortion and contact me through their website. We have not only our own program and Keys to Open Healing, but we also have a referral directory where if you're looking for in-person or virtual or one-on-one or client, clinician focused, if you're looking for religious or non-religious or whatever, we can link you with agencies that will help you. But if I can just add this, Marcy, I answered your question, but I just want to add this to that. To any guys out there listening, you think, well, okay, I'm over it now. It happened and it'll be fine. Dude, it won't. It won't be fine. The acting out behaviors, the manifestations, and the way you parent, the way you treat your wife, the way you interact with the world around you, even the way you interact with God, if you're a believer, are being affected and tainted by the unhealed trauma and unspoken grief from the abortion. Yeah, it's scary for a man to open up, right, Scott? Open up that wound and share that cold nerve and share those feelings. But I'm telling you, if you do it, if you open it up and you walk down a path of healing, you will feel a peace at the end of it. No matter how hard the journey is, Marcy, you said it best. No matter how hard that journey is, when you get to the other side of it, you will feel a peace like you can't even imagine right now.
You do. I know one of the things you do is you mentioned you train people who might be thinking of starting a recovery or a healing program, that sort of thing. If somebody is doing that at their pregnancy center or church or wherever, what are one or two things that they should keep in mind as they begin a program like this, just in terms of, who they're dealing with or what they may deal with, or what are a couple of key things as they begin down that path that they should remember and keep in mind?
Great question. So the absolute first thing is work on your own healing first. Now you may say, well, I'm volunteering at a pregnancy center, but I don't have an abortion story. Okay, well, you've got something. Something happened. You got to work on your own healing first. That's the absolute first thing. The second thing is we are still at a stage where a lot of men are being silent. And so we know statistically from the white paper I mentioned earlier, the Support After Abortion published, that 1 in 5 men in this country will experience abortion loss by the time they're 45. 1 in 5, 20%. So the men are out there. So I see a lot of frustration. People put stuff together. They don't get a lot of activity right away. So that leads me to the next thing, Scott, which is if you're going to build a program for men, you have to build it for men. I've seen literature go out trying to get men into a recovery group at a PRC that's pastels and pinks and butterflies and whatever. And your center's called Her Solution or, whatever. And then you hang a sign out and you put a social media post up and then guys that says, hey, men, come on. And guys drive by and they go, no, I'm not going there. It's got to be geared toward men. That was one of the biggest problems with abortion recovery books in the beginning. Very well-intentioned women wrote these books, or they just repackaged a women's product to be for men. I've been married 25 years. One thing I know above all else is I don't know how women think, right?
Right.
Women and men think, communicate, hurt, and heal differently.
Amen.
And so you have to gear your program toward men. And if you're a new volunteer, get healing yourself and get some training. Link up with other men who are doing the same thing. Support one another, lift one another up, create a brotherhood where you can all march forward together and help one another find solutions. I cut myself off because I could have droned on forever on that.
No, that's good. One of the things you did mention, and I'm glad you did, you mentioned it in passing, is, I think we all understand the importance of a faith-based path to healing and recovery, but not everyone would be there. And that might be a turnoff, for some people to take that initial step. So there are resources, there are ways to at least start down this path that are more secular in nature, right?
Yep. And so our Keys to Hope and Healing booklet, um, we have men's versions and women's, secular and religious, and now Spanish and English, and German will be out here pretty soon. That came from a request from a lady in Austria who was trying to reach men in Austria and Germany. So we have different options. I personally facilitate the secular book, and I'll tell you why. When I thought God hated me, and I had the bad experiences from childhood from my grandma's church, where every Sunday I found out a reason I wasn't good enough for God, never would be, right, yada, yada. If somebody would approach me and said, hey, I see you're hurting. Pray to Jesus because you sinned and he'll heal you. I would have turned and said, all right, dude, have a good one. Take care.
Right.
I had no context, right? And so I am willing. I work with guys through the Keys to Hope and Healing secular book, and I work with guys one-on-one who specifically say they don't want religious. Why? Because any human being, if you are seeking the truth in any situation, eventually it will lead you back to God. My job is to meet you wherever you're at on the path. Now, you think about the story of Jesus and the woman at the well, how he met her, how he met the woman accused of adultery, right? He didn't, it's like you see a house burning down and you're a Christian firefighter and you go up to save somebody in the upstairs window and you say, have you accepted Christ yet? Nope. You're going to burn. Come on. You can't do it that way. Mm-mm. And I'll tell you a little anecdote here. A guy I worked with about 3 years ago who contacted me through an organization. This is before I was with Support After Abortion. And he said, hey, I told them I didn't want no religious crap. And I said, okay. He said, I ain't one of them Christians. I said, I am. Go ahead. Okay, long story short, in the first hour call with this guy, he said more cuss words than a sailor on shore leave. No offense to any sailors listening. By our 8th or 9th session, he had stopped cussing altogether. Why? Because he was mirroring my behavior. By about 3 months in, he started asking me questions. Why are you like the way you? Why are you different? What do you do? Who are you? About 8 months after the first time I talked to him, and we didn't work consistently together this whole time. But about 8 months later, I got a text from him, and he said, guess where I'm at? I said, I haven't a clue. He said, I'm at church. Guess what I'm getting ready to do? I said, don't have any idea. He said, get baptized. I'm not saying you go into a secular willingness to run a secular program as a bait and switch. What I'm saying is you live the tenets of Christ. You let the Holy Spirit work through you while you meet this man where he's at in his pain. As my pastor, who's now retired, used to always say, you earn the right to share the gospel by how you treat him.
Oh, I love that. That's good stuff, right? Say that again.
You earn the right to share the gospel by how you treat him.
Oh, man. You know, we have the opportunity to talk to pregnancy centers a lot and things like that. And it's it's true. I think most people know pregnancy centers are faith-based, and that's where that's the heart from which they come. But just helping them understand that yes, a spiritual awakening is certainly a priority. You can't. It's not always best to do that right out of the gate. And I'm trying to say it artfully, and maybe I'm not, but. Just the way you're I love the way your pastor put that. That's fantastic.
Now, I'll tell you something, dude. He said that 11 years ago, and obviously it stuck with me. And probably every other man in that room. Look, it's easy for me because I've been that guy. I've been that guy who heard the wrong message from Christian leaders. And so maybe after enough of that, I bumped into somebody who really, truly just wanted to share the love of Christ. I'm not there, dude. I got too many wounds. I used to volunteer with a group that fed the homeless. And we'd drive around downtown Indy and dropping off food. But one day I dropped off a lunch. It was under a bridge, and the guy was a Vietnam vet, which my dad was too. And so I sat down beside him. He was in a wheelchair and shot the breeze with him while he ate. The guy running the program came by in the van and said, "Hey, we got to go." And I said, "Hit the next block, come back and get me." And he left and he came back. And then I finally had to get up and go. And after we had dropped everybody off and it was just me and him, he started giving me a bunch of guff about, "Look, this is what we do and this is how we do it. And you need to blah, 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 blah." I said, "Dude, I was doing exactly what we're here to do, I thought. I wasn't just handing the man a sandwich and walking away like he was an animal that needed food in his cage. I wanted to talk to him. Why? Because I wanted him to understand that I was there as a man of God trying to do God's will. Not just someone trying to make myself look good by giving him food. Haha, look what I did. I fed the homeless." And I got 3 different cameras set up, showing it. That's the mentality. Because of the decisions I made when I was young, there was about a month and a half when I was 21 years old where I was literally living in my car 1,000 miles from home, eating cold Spam out of the can. I had to battle my way back out of a lot of dark places mentally. And the wrong people came up trying to talk to me about God. And so I think about that. I know what it's like to be poor when I was young, and I know what it's like to feel like God doesn't want me and whatever. And so I try to meet people where they're at, and I try my level best, and I fail miserably every day, but to do it based on the example Christ left me in Scripture. If I can do that successfully, if I can show you love, then just like that dude on the phone, you're going to wonder eventually, what's with this Greg guy? Why is he different?
Yep. Supportafterabortion.com is the website. Lots of great resources there. Whether you're thinking about starting a program to help folks, or if you're one of the guys and you're listening, you're thinking, "I just don't know where to begin." Check out the website. Lots of great resources there, and that might be a good place to start. Greg, thanks so much for joining us here today. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you both for having me. It's been a blast.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Dear Jane. Don't forget to subscribe. Of course, you can find us on all your podcast platforms of choice. Don't forget to follow us on X and Instagram. On behalf of Marcy Little, I'm Scott Baker. Thanks for listening.